The briefing room fell silent when she walked in. Colonel Harrison's face went pale, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "You're dead," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "Phantom 7 died in Kandahar. I signed the report myself." The young woman smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes, and began unbuttoning her uniform sleeve. "Then you signed a lie, sir. And I have the scars to prove it." What happened next would shake the foundations of military intelligence and expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of command. But first, let me take you back to where it all began, 3 years earlier, when Elena Novak was just another face in the crowd, fighting to be seen. We continue. Let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out, subscribe now for more. Elena Novak had learned to make herself invisible long before the military taught her how. Growing up in a small village outside Prague, she perfected the art of blending into backgrounds, of being present without being noticed. It was a survival skill in a household where her father's moods shifted like weather patterns, unpredictable and often violent. At 22, she stood at 5 feet 4 inches, with dark blonde hair usually pulled back in a severe bun and gray-green eyes that seemed to catalogue everything while revealing nothing. Her European accent, softened by years of English language immersion, gave her words a precise quality that some found charming and others found unsettling. The Forward Operating Base Perseus hummed with activity as the afternoon sun beat down on the Afghan desert. Elena had been stationed there for 7 months, working in the intelligence division as a junior analyst. It was tedious work, translating intercepted communications, cross-referencing reports, building profiles of targets that other people would eventually act upon. She was good at her job. Excellent, actually. Her linguistic abilities were exceptional. She spoke Czech, English, Russian, Pashto, and Dari with varying degrees of fluency. Her analytical mind could spot patterns in data that others missed. But in the military hierarchy, being good wasn't always enough. Being memorable was what mattered, and Elena had spent her entire life trying not to be memorable. The intelligence center was a converted storage facility, its walls lined with monitors displaying real-time surveillance feeds and intercepted communications. Elena sat at her usual station in the back corner, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she translated a series of radio intercepts from the previous night. Something was bothering her about the communications pattern. 3 separate groups had used variations of the same phrase: "The shipment arrives when the moon is dark." It could have been coincidence. It could have been standard operational security. But Elena's instincts, honed by years of reading between lines and understanding subtext, told her it was something more. She pulled up a calendar and cross-referenced it with recent activity reports. The new moon was in 4 days. If these communications were coordinated, if they represented a planned operation, then something significant was about to happen. Novak. The voice belonged to Captain Dylan Reed, the intelligence officer who managed her section. He was a career military man, competent but unimaginative, the kind of person who followed procedures and trusted established protocols above intuition. Elena turned in her chair. "Yes, sir. I need you to finish those translations by end of shift. We've got a backlog piling up." "Sir, I think I've found something in these intercepts. There's a pattern that suggests coordinated action plan for..." Reed cut her off with an impatient wave. "Novak, I need translations, not theories. We have dedicated analysts who handle pattern recognition. Your job is to turn their words into our words. Understand?" Elena felt the familiar weight of dismissal settle over her shoulders. "Yes, sir." "Understood." As Reed walked away, she heard him mutter to another officer, "These junior analysts always think they've cracked the code. Just because she speaks the language doesn't mean she understands the context." The words stung, but Elena had developed thick skin over the years. She returned to her translations, but her mind kept circling back to the pattern she'd identified. 4 days until the new moon. 4 days until something happened, and no one was paying attention because the person who noticed wasn't important enough to be heard. That evening, Elena sat in the small quarters she shared with two other female soldiers, staring at her personal laptop. She'd copied the relevant communications data onto her personal drive, a violation of protocol but one she justified by telling herself she was being thorough. She spent 3 hours building a timeline, mapping the communications against known militant movements in the region, cross-referencing with weather patterns and historical attack data. The picture that emerged made her blood run cold. The communications weren't just coordinated. They were sophisticated, using a coding system she'd only seen in high-level intelligence reports. Someone was planning a major operation, possibly targeting the base itself or one of the coalition convoys that regularly passed through the region. Elena drafted a detailed report, documenting her findings and her concerns. She attached it to an email addressed to Reed, then hesitated before sending. This could go two ways. Either he'd recognize the value of her analysis and take action, or he'd reprimand her for overstepping her role. She clicked send anyway. Some things were too important to leave unsaid, even if saying them came with consequences. The response came the next morning, delivered not via email but in person. Reed appeared at her station with an expression that told Elena everything she needed to know before he spoke a word. "My office. Now." Reed's voice carried across the intelligence center, drawing curious glances from the other analysts. Elena stood, her face carefully neutral, and followed him through the maze of desks and equipment to the small office he maintained at the back of the facility. He closed the door with more force than necessary. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Novak?" Elena remained standing at attention. "Sir, I was following up on. You were accessing classified communications on an unsecured personal device. You were conducting unauthorized analysis outside your assigned duties. And you were making intelligence assessments that are well above your pay grade and security clearance. Sir, with respect, I only copied the data I had already translated. And the pattern I identified suggests. I don't care what you think you identified." Reed's face had taken on a reddish hue that suggested his blood pressure was climbing. "You're a translator, Novak. That's it. You translate words from one language to another. You don't interpret them. You don't analyze them. And you sure as hell don't send me midnight reports full of speculation and amateur analysis." The word amateur landed like a slap. Elena had spent 4 years studying intelligence analysis at Charles University in Prague before joining the military. She'd graduated top of her class in the military intelligence training program. But none of that mattered when someone had already decided what box you belonged in. "Sir, I believe there's a credible threat." "Based on what?" "Your gut feeling. Some vague pattern you think you see?" Reed leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from anger to something approaching pity. "Look, Novak, I get it. You're smart. You've got language skills. But intelligence work is about more than being clever. It's about experience, about understanding the bigger picture. You don't have that yet." Elena felt something cold and hard forming in her chest. "And I'll never get that experience if no one takes me seriously." Reed sighed. "This isn't about not taking you seriously. It's about staying in your lane. We have procedures for a reason. If everyone just went off doing their own analysis, making their own assessments, the whole system would fall apart. Even if that means missing something important. Especially then. Because 9 times out of 10, what junior analysts think is important is just noise. You're seeing patterns because you're looking for patterns, not because they're actually there." Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. There was no point. Reed had made up his mind, and nothing she said would change it. She was the translator who didn't understand context, the junior analyst who didn't have experience, the person who needed to stay in her lane. "Am I dismissed, sir?" Reed studied her for a moment. "The data you copied to your personal device needs to be deleted. Immediately. And this doesn't happen again. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Elena left his office and returned to her station, aware of the eyes tracking her movement across the room. By evening, everyone in the intelligence center would know that Novak had overstepped and been put in her place. It was the kind of story that spread quickly in military circles, a cautionary tale about knowing your role. She deleted the files from her personal laptop as ordered, watching the progress bar slowly erase hours of work. But she'd already memorized the key details. The new moon was in 3 days. If she was right about the pattern, something would happen then. If she was wrong, then Reed was correct and she was just another junior analyst seeing threats in shadows. The next 2 days passed in tense routine. Elena performed her assigned translations with mechanical efficiency, speaking only when spoken to, keeping her observations to herself. She watched the intelligence reports that filtered through the center, looking for any indication that someone else had noticed the pattern she'd identified. Nothing. On the 3rd day, as the sun climbed toward its zenith and the temperature in the intelligence center climbed with it, Elena was translating a routine radio intercept when she heard a phrase that made her blood freeze. "The package is ready. Delivery tonight when the moon sleeps." She looked up at the calendar on the wall. Tonight was the new moon. She'd been right. Elena glanced toward Reed's office. He was in a meeting with senior officers, visible through the glass partition. She could interrupt, could insist they listen to her. But she already knew what would happen. She'd been dismissed once. Interrupting a senior staff meeting to repeat the same warning would be career suicide. So she made a different choice. She stood up, grabbed her gear, and walked out of the intelligence center. Ready to continue with parts 3 to 4 when you give the signal. Each subsequent part will maintain the 800-word count, and I'll add the second CTA after approximately 1,500 words/10 minutes as requested. Elena didn't head back to her quarters. Instead, she made her way to the operations center, a separate building where mission planning and tactical coordination took place. If the intelligence center wouldn't listen to her analysis, maybe the people who actually conducted operations would. The operations center was busier than usual. 3 missions were being coordinated simultaneously, and the room buzzed with radio chatter and urgent conversations. Elena spotted Lieutenant Sarich near the tactical display, reviewing flight paths for a scheduled convoy escort. Lieutenant Chen, Elena approached carefully, aware that she was crossing into territory where she had no official business. Chen looked up, her expression neutral. "Novak, right? Intelligence Division? What can I do for you?" "Ma'am, I need 2 minutes of your time. It's urgent." Something in Elena's tone must have registered because Chen stepped away from the display and led her to a quieter corner of the room. "Talk to me." Elena laid out her findings as concisely as possible. The pattern in the communications, the new moon timing, the sophistication of the coding system. She spoke quickly, aware that she was asking someone to trust analysis that her own commanding officer had dismissed. Chen listened without interrupting, her eyes sharp and assessing. When Elena finished, there was a long moment of silence. "Does Captain Reed know about this analysis?" Chen asked finally. Elena's heart sank. "Yes, ma'am. He ordered me to delete my files and focus on my assigned duties." "I see." Chen's expression didn't change, but Elena could read the calculation happening behind her eyes. Supporting a junior analyst who'd already been dismissed by her CO was a risk. "And you came here anyway?" "Because I believe the threat is real, ma'am. If I'm wrong, the worst that happens is you waste resources on extra security. If I'm right and no one acts." Elena left the sentence unfinished. Chen studied her for another long moment. "You realize you're putting your career on the line here. If Reed finds out you went over his head, after he specifically told you to drop it, you'll be lucky if you're just reassigned to inventory duty." "I understand, ma'am." "And you're willing to accept those consequences?" "Yes, ma'am. Because if something happens tonight and I did nothing, I couldn't live with that." Chen nodded slowly. "Wait here." She walked over to the tactical display where Major Thomas Garrett was coordinating the evening's operations. Elena watched as they spoke, Chen gesturing occasionally toward the map, Garrett's expression growing increasingly serious. After several minutes, Garrett looked directly at Elena and beckoned her over. "Analyst Novak," Garrett's voice was gruff but not unkind. "Lieutenant Chen says you've identified a potential threat for tonight. Walk me through it." Elena repeated her analysis, this time with Garrett asking pointed questions about timing, locations, and the specific nature of the communications she'd intercepted. Unlike Reed, Garrett didn't dismiss her conclusions out of hand. He probed for weaknesses in her logic, tested her assumptions, but he listened. When she finished, Garrett exchanged a glance with Chen. "If you're right, we're looking at a coordinated attack, possibly on multiple targets." "Yes, sir. That's my assessment. And if you're wrong, I'm going to have to explain to Command why I scrambled resources based on the analysis of a junior translator who was specifically ordered to drop this investigation." Elena swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Garrett studied the tactical display, his jaw working as he considered his options. Finally, he made a decision. "Chen, get me Colonel Harrison. And someone find Captain Reed. I want everyone who has skin in this game in one room, now." As Chen moved to execute the order, Garrett turned back to Elena. "Hope you're right about this, Novak. For both our sakes." Elena nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. In 20 minutes, she'd be facing Reed again, this time in front of senior command. Her career hung in the balance, suspended on the strength of a pattern only she had seen. The conference room filled quickly with senior officers and key personnel. Colonel Harrison arrived first, his weathered face showing irritation at being pulled from dinner. Captain Reed followed moments later, his expression darkening when he spotted Elena standing near the tactical display. "Someone want to tell me why we're having an emergency briefing?" Harrison demanded, settling into the chair at the head of the table. "I was assured all operations for tonight were routine." Major Garrett stepped forward. "Sir, new intelligence has come to light that suggests we may be facing a coordinated attack tonight. Multiple targets, timed with the new moon." Harrison's eyes sharpened. "What intelligence? Reed, why wasn't I briefed?" Reed shot Elena a look that could have melted steel. "Sir, this is based on unauthorized analysis by analyst Novak, who I specifically ordered to cease this line of investigation 2 days ago. The data she's using was obtained through improper channels and her conclusions are speculative at best." "With respect, Captain," Elena spoke up, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My analysis is based on patterns and legitimate intercepts that I was assigned to translate. The connections I've identified suggest a level of coordination that poses a significant threat." "You're a translator," Reed snapped. "Not an intelligence analyst. You don't have the training or experience to make these kinds of assessments." "Actually," Lieutenant Chen interjected, "according to her service record, analyst Novak has a degree in intelligence analysis from Charles University and graduated top of her class from advanced intelligence training. She's overqualified for her current position, not underqualified." Reed's face reddened. "That's not the point. The point is she violated protocol and went against direct orders." "The point," Harrison interrupted, his voice cutting through the argument, "is whether there's a credible threat to this base and our personnel. Everything else is secondary." He turned to Elena. "Analyst Novak, present your findings. And make it brief." Elena stepped to the tactical display, calling up the data she'd memorized. She walked them through the intercepted communications, the timing patterns, the sophistication of the coding system. She showed how 3 apparently separate militant cells had used coordinated language, how the timing aligned with historical attack patterns, how the new moon provided tactical advantage for a night operation. As she spoke, she watched the faces around the table. Reed remained skeptical, his arms crossed. Chen was supportive but cautious. Garrett looked thoughtful, occasionally nodding. But it was Harrison's reaction that mattered most, and his expression gave nothing away. When Elena finished, the room fell silent. Harrison studied the tactical display, his fingers drumming on the table in a rhythm that matched Elena's accelerated heartbeat. "Captain Reed," Harrison said finally, "why wasn't this analysis brought to my attention when analyst Novak first presented it?" Reed shifted in his chair. Sir, because it's based on speculation and pattern recognition that hasn't been verified through proper intelligence channels. We get dozens of intercepts every day. If we elevated every potential pattern to a threat assessment, we'd be paralyzed by false alarms. And how many of those patterns are identified by someone with Novak's linguistic and analytical background? That's not the issue, sir. The issue is chain of command and proper procedure. Harrison's jaw tightened. Captain, I'm going to be very clear. I don't give a damn about procedure if it means missing a legitimate threat. What I care about is keeping my personnel alive. He turned to Garrett. Major, what's your assessment? Garrett stood. Sir, the pattern analyst Novak identified is consistent with sophisticated militant operations. The timing, the coordination, the linguistic markers, they all suggest planning at a level we haven't seen in this sector for months. I recommend we elevate our security posture and scramble quick reaction forces. That will require pulling resources from scheduled operations, Reed pointed out. Better to waste resources on a false alarm than to be caught unprepared for a real attack, Chen added. Harrison made his decision. Elevate to threat level orange. Scramble QRF, double perimeter security, and ground all non-essential air operations. If nothing happens by dawn, we'll reassess. He looked at Elena. Analyst Novak, you'll be in this operations center tonight, monitoring communications. If this attack materializes, I want real-time translation and analysis. Yes, sir. As the meeting dispersed and officers rushed to implement the new security measures, Reed cornered Elena in the hallway. His voice was low and dangerous. If you're wrong about this, Novak, if you just cost us resources and embarrass this command based on paranoid speculation, your military career is over. Do you understand that? Elena met his gaze without flinching. And if I'm right, sir, how many lives will we have saved? Reed had no answer for that. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. The operations center transformed as night fell. Additional monitors were brought online, showing feeds from perimeter cameras and drone surveillance. Quick reaction force teams were staged at strategic points around the base, ready to respond within minutes. The atmosphere crackled with tension as personnel moved with the controlled urgency of professionals preparing for potential combat. Elena sat at a communications station, headphones on, monitoring multiple channels simultaneously. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, translating intercepted communications in real time and flagging anything that matched the patterns she'd identified. Around her, the operations staff coordinated defensive preparations with quiet efficiency. 2,200 hours came and went. Nothing. 2,300 hours. Still quiet. By midnight, Elena could feel doubt creeping in. The base had been on heightened alert for 5 hours. Resources were stretched thin. Personnel who should have been sleeping were instead manning defensive positions. And there had been no indication of any threat. She caught sight of Reed standing near the tactical display, his arms crossed and his expression smug. He didn't need to say anything. His body language communicated clearly enough, "I told you so." Major Garrett approached Elena's station. "Anything on the channels?" "No, sir. Radio traffic is actually lighter than normal for this time of night. It's..." Elena paused, a cold realization dawning. "It's too quiet." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Sir, there's always ambient radio traffic in this region. Civilian communications, routine militant chatter, interference from Pakistani signals. But for the past 40 minutes, it's been almost silent." Elena pulled up her monitoring logs. "Look at the pattern. Normal traffic until 23:20 hours, then it drops off dramatically. That's not natural." "They could be maintaining radio silence," Garrett suggested. "Or they're about to make their move and don't want to give away their positions." Elena switched channels, listening intently. "Sir, I'm picking up something. Very faint, looks like encrypted burst transmissions on a frequency we don't normally monitor. Garrett leaned over her shoulder. Can you break the encryption? Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. Not in real time, but I can record it for analysis. There's definitely coordinated signaling happening. Multiple sources, all using the same encryption protocol. Before Garrett could respond, an alarm blared across the operations center. One of the perimeter camera feeds showed movement on the northeast sector. Multiple heat signatures, moving with tactical precision toward the outer fence line. Contact, someone shouted. Northeast perimeter, multiple hostiles approaching. The operations center erupted into controlled chaos. Harrison appeared from his office, pulling on his tactical vest. How many? At least 20 signatures on thermal, sir, the surveillance officer reported. They're using the drainage ditch for cover, just like Novak predicted, Chen finished, pulling up Elena's original threat assessment on the main display. She had the northeastern approach identified as the most likely attack vector. Reed's smug expression had vanished. He stood frozen, staring at the screen as the reality of the situation sank in. Elena had been right. The attack she'd predicted was happening exactly as she described it. Scramble QRF Teams 1 and 3, Harrison ordered. Get those attackers pinned down before they reach the vehicle depot. And someone get me air support, now. Elena continued monitoring the communications channels, her training taking over despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Sir, I'm picking up coordinated communications. This northeastern attack might be a diversion. The encryption pattern suggests they have at least 2 other elements positioned around the perimeter. Garrett immediately grasped the implication. They're trying to draw our forces to one point while attacking elsewhere. Where are the other elements? Elena studied her intercepts, cross-referencing with the base layout she'd memorized. Southwest sector, near the fuel depot. And, there. She pointed to a spot on the tactical display. The communications hub. They're going after high-value targets while we're focused on the northeastern breach. Harrison didn't hesitate. Redirect QRF-2 to the fuel depot. Double the guards on the communications hub. And someone get me eyes on the southwest sector immediately. As the orders went out and personnel rushed to respond, Elena kept working, translating intercepts and tracking the attack's progression. The attackers were sophisticated, using a level of tactical coordination that confirmed her original assessment. This wasn't a random assault. It was a carefully planned operation that would have succeeded if the base hadn't been warned. If she hadn't insisted on being heard. The firefight lasted 43 minutes. Elena tracked it all through intercepted communications and tactical displays, watching as the quick reaction forces engaged the attackers at 3 separate points around the base perimeter. Her real-time translations gave commanders crucial intelligence about enemy positions and intentions, turning what could have been a devastating surprise attack into a defensive victory. When the last hostile signature disappeared from the thermal displays, melting back into the darkness beyond the perimeter, the operations center erupted in controlled celebration. No coalition casualties. Minimal damage to base infrastructure. The attackers had been repelled before they could achieve any of their objectives. Elena sat back in her chair, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She'd been right. The pattern had been real, the threat legitimate. But instead of relief, she felt only exhaustion and a strange sense of anticlimax. Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the noise. Analyst Novak. My office. Now. The celebration died around her. Elena stood, her legs unsteady, and followed Harrison through the operations center. Reed fell in behind them, his face unreadable. Chen caught Elena's eye as she passed and gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. Harrison's office was sparse and functional, decorated only with operational maps and unit citations. He gestured for Elena to sit while Reed remained standing by the door, his posture rigid. That was good work tonight, Novak, Harrison began, settling into his chair. Your analysis was accurate, your real-time translations were invaluable, and your insistence on being heard probably saved lives. I'm putting you in for a commendation. Thank you, sir. Harrison's expression hardened. However, the fact remains that you violated direct orders from your commanding officer. You accessed classified data on unsecured systems. You conducted unauthorized analysis outside your assigned duties. And you went over Captain Reed's head when he specifically told you to drop your investigation. Elena felt her stomach drop. Even being right wasn't enough. Sir, I understand. You understand nothing, Harrison interrupted. Captain Reed, what's the appropriate response to an analyst who disregards the chain of command, regardless of the outcome? Reed's voice was cold. Disciplinary action, sir. Possibly court-martial for violating security protocols. That's one option, Harrison agreed. He turned back to Elena. The other option is to recognize that sometimes the system fails. That sometimes being a good soldier means knowing when to break the rules. That sometimes the person who sees the threat isn't the person we expect to see it. Elena hardly dared to breathe. Harrison leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen, Novak. You're being transferred. Effective immediately, you're no longer assigned to the translation pool. You're being moved to the Threat Assessment Division, where your analytical skills can be properly utilized. Reed stiffened. Sir, with respect. I'm not finished, Captain. Harrison's tone brooked no argument. Furthermore, Analyst Novak will be receiving specialized training in advanced intelligence analysis and tactical assessment. She clearly has abilities that are being wasted in her current role. Elena's mind reeled. This wasn't a reprimand. It was a promotion. However, Harrison continued, his gaze boring into Elena, this is your one free pass. The next time you identify a threat, you follow proper channels. You make your case through the chain of command. You don't go rogue. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Report to Major Garrett in the morning. He'll brief you on your new duties. Harrison turned to Reed. Captain, I suggest you spend some time reflecting on how we identify and develop talent in this unit. Dismissed. As they left the office, Reed grabbed Elena's arm in the hallway. His grip was tight, his face inches from hers. You got lucky tonight, Novak. But luck runs out. Watch your back. He released her and walked away, leaving Elena standing alone in the corridor. She'd won the battle but made a powerful enemy in the process. She just didn't know yet how much that would cost her. 3 months passed in a blur of intensive training and operational assignments. Elena threw herself into her new role with fierce determination, proving repeatedly that Colonel Harrison's faith in her abilities wasn't misplaced. She identified patterns in militant communications that led to successful raids, predicted attack vectors that saved convoys, and built intelligence profiles that helped dismantle several insurgent networks. But success came with a price. Reed's hostility didn't fade with time. If anything, it intensified as Elena's reputation grew. He questioned her assessments and briefings, delayed her security clearance upgrades, and spread subtle doubts about her reliability among the intelligence community. She got lucky once. Elena overheard him telling another officer in the mess hall. Eventually, her luck will run out, and when it does, people will die because command put too much faith in an analyst who thinks she's smarter than the system. Elena ignored the whispers and focused on her work. She had allies now. Major Garrett trusted her instincts. Lieutenant Chen had become a genuine friend. And Colonel Harrison made it clear that performance mattered more than politics in his command. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon when a new operation landed on her desk. Codenamed Phantom 7, it was a deep reconnaissance mission targeting a high-value militant commander operating in the mountainous region near the Pakistani border. The mission required inserting a small team into hostile territory for 72 hours of surveillance and intelligence gathering. Elena studied the mission parameters with growing unease. Something about the intelligence package felt wrong. The target location was based on signals intelligence that seemed too convenient, too precisely timed. The communications intercepts used language patterns that didn't match the commander's known style. She spent 2 days analyzing every piece of data in the mission file, running linguistic analysis on the intercepts, comparing them against historical communications from the same target. The more she dug, the more convinced she became that something was fundamentally wrong with the intelligence. On Thursday morning, she requested a meeting with Major Garrett. "Sir, I have serious concerns about Operation Phantom 7, Elena began, spreading her analysis across his desk. "The intelligence doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The language patterns are wrong, the timing is too precise, and the target location doesn't match the commander's known operational profile." Garrett frowned, studying her documentation. "The intelligence came through official channels, vetted by multiple analysts." "Are you saying everyone missed something?" "I'm saying I think we're looking at deliberate deception, sir. Someone wants us to send a team to these coordinates. The question is why?" "That's a serious allegation, Novak." "You're suggesting the intelligence was planted?" "Yes, sir. And I think I know by whom." Elena pulled up a separate file. "I've been tracking communication patterns from a source we identified 3 months ago. The linguistic markers match perfectly with the Phantom 7 intercepts. This source has provided information before, but it's never led to successful operations. We've always arrived too late or found nothing." Garrett's expression darkened. "You're suggesting we have a deliberate disinformation campaign targeting our operations?" "More than that, sir. I think this is a trap. If we send Phantom 7 to these coordinates, they'll be walking into an ambush." "Have you shared this analysis with anyone else?" "Not yet, sir. I wanted to brief you first." Garrett stood, gathering Elena's documentation. "We need to take this to Harrison immediately. If you're right, we need to scrub the mission. If you're wrong." He left the implication hanging. They found Colonel Harrison in the operations center, reviewing final preparations for Phantom 7. The team was scheduled to insert at dusk, less than 6 hours away. "Sir," Garrett said urgently, "we have a potential problem with the operation." Harrison looked up, his expression shifting from focus to concern when he saw Elena's face. "Talk to me." Elena laid out her findings quickly and precisely, walking Harrison through the linguistic analysis, the pattern of failed intelligence from the suspected source, and her conclusion that Phantom 7 was walking into a deliberate ambush. When she finished, Harrison was silent for a long moment, studying the data she'd presented. Around them, the operations center continued its normal rhythm, personnel unaware that the entire mission might be hanging in the balance. "Captain Reed," Harrison called out. Reed appeared from across the room, and Elena's stomach tightened. "Captain, you vetted the intelligence for Phantom 7. What's your assessment of analyst Novak's concerns?" Reed barely glanced at Elena's documentation. "Sir, this is the same pattern we saw 3 months ago. Analyst Novak sees conspiracies and deception where more experienced analysts see legitimate intelligence. The Phantom 7 intel has been verified through multiple channels. It's solid. She's identified specific linguistic inconsistencies," Garrett pointed out. "Based on subjective interpretation of communication styles," Reed countered. "This isn't hard science, Major. It's guesswork dressed up as analysis." Harrison studied the conflicting assessments, his jaw tight with the weight of command decision. Lives hung in the balance, and he had 2 intelligence officers presenting diametrically opposed conclusions. "How confident are you in this analysis, Novak?" Harrison asked. Elena met his gaze without wavering. 90% certain, sir. The linguistic markers are too consistent to be coincidence. This is deliberate deception designed to draw our forces into a kill zone." "And you, Captain Reed? Your confidence level?" 75% that the intelligence is legitimate, sir. But more importantly, if we scrub every mission based on one analyst's gut feeling, we'll never conduct operations. At some point, we have to trust our established intelligence procedures." Harrison turned to the tactical display showing the planned insertion route. "If Novak is right and we send the team anyway, what are we looking at?" Garrett answered. 6-person recon team inserted into a prepared ambush position. Best case scenario, they recognize the trap and extract before contact. Worst case, we lose the entire team and the enemy gains valuable intelligence about our operational capabilities. And if Reed is right and we scrub based on Novak's analysis, we miss a chance to locate and potentially eliminate a high-value target, Reed said. And we send a message to our intelligence sources that we don't trust their information, which could compromise future operations. The silence in the small command huddle was suffocating. Elena could see the calculation happening in Harrison's mind, weighing risk against reward, lives against mission objectives, established procedure against unconventional insight. "Sir," Elena said quietly, "there's one way to resolve this. Send me in first." Every head turned toward her. "Absolutely not," Reed said immediately. "You're an intelligence analyst, not a field operative. I speak the local languages fluently. I know the terrain from satellite analysis. And if I'm wrong about the ambush, the recon team can proceed as planned with minimal delay. If I'm right, I'll spot the trap before the full team is committed." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "You're proposing a solo infiltration ahead of the main element?" "Yes, sir. Drop me in 2 clicks from the target location. I'll conduct a preliminary reconnaissance, verify whether the intelligence is legitimate or a trap, and signal the team accordingly." "This is insane," Reed protested. "She has no field experience. No combat training beyond basic qualifications. Sending her in alone is suicide." "I've completed advanced tactical training as part of my new assignment," Elena countered. "And I'm not proposing direct engagement. Just reconnaissance and early warning." Garrett looked thoughtful. "It could work. We insert her at dusk with the recon team in holding pattern. She conducts a 4-hour reconnaissance window. If she signals clear, the team proceeds. If she signals trap, they abort. And if she gets killed or captured?" Reed demanded. "Then we've compromised the entire operation and lost an analyst." "Then you'll have been right that I overstepped my capabilities," Elena said, her voice steady. "But at least the recon team will be alive." Harrison studied her for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing her determination against the risk, her track record against the unconventional nature of what she was proposing. "How soon can you be ready?" Reed's face went pale. "Sir, you can't seriously be considering this." "Captain, if analyst Novak is willing to bet her life on her analysis, that tells me something about her confidence level." "Major Garrett, prep a solo insertion for Novak. Light equipment, recon only, strict 4-hour time limit. The recon team holds at the staging area until she signals." "Yes, sir." As Garrett moved to coordinate the logistics, Reed stepped closer to Elena. His voice was low enough that only she could hear. "You're going to get yourself killed trying to prove you're right. And when you do, don't expect anyone to risk their lives coming after you." Elena met his hostile gaze. "I don't expect anyone to come after me. That's why I'm going in alone." 2 hours later, Elena sat in the back of a helicopter, watching the Afghan landscape roll past below. Her equipment was minimal: reconnaissance gear, communications equipment, a sidearm she hoped she wouldn't need to use. She'd left a letter in her quarters, addressed to her sister in Prague, explaining why she was doing this. The helicopter banked toward the insertion point, and Elena felt her heart rate accelerate. This was beyond anything she'd trained for, beyond anything she'd imagined when she joined the intelligence service. But the alternative was watching 6 soldiers walk into what she was certain was a trap. The crew chief signaled 30 seconds. Elena moved to the door, checking her gear one final time. "Good luck, ma'am," the crew chief said, giving her a thumbs up. Elena nodded and prepared to fast rope into the darkness below. Luck wasn't going to be enough tonight. She was going to need skill, instinct, and the kind of determination that came from knowing you were absolutely right, even when everyone else doubted you. The descent into darkness was both terrifying and exhilarating. Elena hit the ground hard, rolled to absorb the impact, and immediately moved away from the insertion point. The helicopter's rotors faded into the distance, leaving her alone in hostile territory with nothing but her training and her conviction that she was right about the trap. The terrain was rougher than the satellite imagery had suggested. Rocky outcroppings and steep ravines made movement slow and treacherous. Elena navigated by moonlight and instinct, moving toward the coordinates where the intelligence suggested the militant commander would be located. She'd covered maybe a kilometer when she spotted the first sign that confirmed her suspicions. Boot prints in the soft earth near a dried riverbed, too many to be a small militant cell, too fresh to be from previous patrols. Someone had moved a significant force through this area within the last 12 hours. Elena keyed her radio, using the brief burst transmission protocol that minimized detection risk. Phantom Control, this is Novak. Confirming signs of recent large-scale movement in the target area. Continuing reconnaissance. Major Garrett's response came through her earpiece. Copy, Novak. Be advised, recon team is standing by at the staging area. You have 3 hours remaining. Elena continued forward, every sense heightened, watching for signs of the ambush she was certain awaited any force that approached the target coordinates. The closer she got, the more evidence she found. Disturbed earth where positions had been hastily prepared. Broken vegetation indicating recent passage of multiple personnel. And then, most damning of all, a discarded ration wrapper from Pakistani military supplies. This wasn't a militant cell. This was a coordinated operation, possibly involving foreign elements, designed specifically to target coalition forces. Elena was documenting the evidence with her camera when she heard voices ahead. She froze, pressing herself against a rocky outcropping. 2 men were speaking in Pashto, their conversation casual and unconcerned. Should arrive just after midnight, one was saying. The whole team, walking right into the kill zone. Easy targets. You're certain they'll come? The other asked. The intelligence was perfect. They have no reason to suspect. By dawn, we'll have eliminated an entire American reconnaissance unit. Elena's blood ran cold. She'd been right, but hearing the confirmation in the enemy's own words made it terrifyingly real. She needed to warn the team immediately, but moving now would risk detection. She remained motionless, barely breathing, as the 2 men continued their conversation. They discussed the ambush positions, the timing, the expected routes of approach. Elena committed every detail to memory, building a complete picture of the trap that had been set. When the men finally moved on, continuing their patrol, she waited another 10 minutes before keying her radio. Phantom Control, this is Novak. Confirming trap. Repeat, confirming trap. Enemy forces in prepared positions, anticipating insertion at target coordinates. I have details of ambush layout. Recommend immediate abort of primary mission. There was a brief pause, then Garrett's voice, tense but controlled. Copy, Novak. Stand by for extraction. Negative, Control. I can provide additional intelligence on enemy positions and strength. Requesting permission to continue reconnaissance. Novak, your mission was to verify the threat. You've done that. Get to the extraction point. But Elena was already moving, working her way around the perimeter of the ambush position. She could see the layout now, dozens of fighters positioned in a horseshoe formation that would have caught the recon team in a devastating crossfire. She documented positions, estimated numbers, identified weapons placements. She was so focused on gathering intelligence that she almost missed the sound behind her. Almost, but not quite. Elena spun, reaching for her sidearm, but she was too slow. A figure emerged from the shadows, rifle raised, and in the moonlight Elena saw his face shift from alertness to surprise. Woman, he said in Pashto, his confusion evident. That moment of hesitation saved her life. Elena didn't freeze. She didn't panic. She moved with the combat training that everyone had assumed she'd never need, striking fast and precise, disarming him before he could call out or fire. The struggle was brief and brutal. When it was over, Elena stood over the unconscious fighter, her hands shaking but her mind clear. She'd just crossed another line, moving from intelligence analyst to active combatant. But there was no time to process what that meant. She heard shouts in the distance. The fighter would be missed soon. Her reconnaissance mission had just become an escape and evasion scenario. Elena keyed her radio one final time. Phantom control, my position is compromised. Enemy aware of intrusion. All intelligence transmitted. Moving to alternate extraction point Echo 7. Then she ran into the darkness, hoping she could survive long enough to deliver the intelligence that would save the recon team's lives. The pursuit began within minutes. Elena heard the shouts behind her, organized and coordinated, as the ambush force realized they had an intruder in their midst. She pushed through the darkness, her training and adrenaline overriding the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Extraction point Echo 7 was 3 kilometers away, across terrain that would be difficult enough in daylight. At night, pursued by hostile forces, it seemed impossible. But Elena had learned long ago that impossible was just another word for challenging. She used every trick she'd learned, doubling back on her trail, moving through water to mask her scent, using the rocky terrain to her advantage. The pursuers were skilled, but they were also overconfident, expecting to find a trained soldier, not realizing they were hunting someone who'd spent her life being underestimated. Twice she had to hide while search parties passed within meters of her position. Once, she heard them radioing ahead, trying to cut off her escape routes. They were organized, professional, and growing increasingly frustrated that one woman was evading their entire force. Elena reached a ridge overlooking a valley and paused to check her map. Echo 7 was on the far side, near a dried riverbed that would provide cover for helicopter extraction. But between her and safety lay open ground, exposed and deadly. She keyed her radio. Phantom control, approaching Echo 7. Be advised, heavy enemy presence in the area. Extraction will be hot. Garrett's voice came back immediately. Copy, Novak. Birds are wheels up, 15 minutes out. Can you hold? Elena looked at the valley below, at the figures moving with tactical precision through the darkness, searching for her. 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours. I'll be there, control. Just tell them to come in fast. She began her descent into the valley, moving from cover to cover, watching the search patterns of the enemy forces. They were closing in, tightening the noose, but they still didn't know her exact position. That was her one advantage. Elena was halfway across the valley when a spotlight suddenly blazed to life, sweeping the terrain. They'd brought in a vehicle, probably anticipating her extraction point. The light swept past her hiding spot, and she pressed herself flat against the ground, not daring to breathe. The spotlight moved on, and Elena seized her chance. She sprinted for the riverbed, her boots silent on the sandy ground. Behind her, someone shouted. They'd spotted her movement. Gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up dirt around her feet. Elena dove into the riverbed as rounds impacted the rocks above her head. She rolled, came up running, and didn't look back. The riverbed provided some cover, but it also channeled her movement, making her path predictable. The enemy forces were converging, cutting off her escape routes, forcing her toward a killing zone. Then she heard it, the most beautiful sound in the world. Helicopter rotors, coming in fast and low. Phantom control, I have eyes on extraction bird. Elena gasped into her radio, her lungs burning. Coming to you hot. Copy, Novak. We see you. 30 seconds. The longest 30 seconds of Elena's life. She ran with everything she had left, the helicopter dropping into the valley ahead of her, its door gunners already engaging the pursuing forces. Tracer rounds lit up the night as the gunners provided covering fire. Elena reached the helicopter as it hovered 3 feet off the ground. Hands reached down, grabbing her gear, hauling her aboard. She collapsed on the deck as the aircraft climbed steeply, banking away from the valley. Welcome aboard, Analyst Novak, the crew chief said, grinning. Hell of a way to spend an evening. Elena managed a weak smile, too exhausted to speak. She'd done it. She'd confirmed the trap, gathered the intelligence, and survived to deliver it. The recon team was safe, the mission was scrubbed, and she'd proven once again that being right mattered more than being convenient. But as the helicopter carried her back toward base, Elena felt something wrong in her side. She looked down and saw blood spreading across her uniform. One of those bullets had found its mark after all. "Medic," she heard someone say, the voice seeming to come from very far away. "We've got a casualty." The world tilted, and Elena's last thought before darkness claimed her was simple and clear: at least I was right. When she woke up, it would be in a hospital bed, with Colonel Harrison standing beside her, about to tell her that Operation Phantom 7 had been officially scrubbed based on her intelligence. That the ambush force had been there exactly as she described. That her reconnaissance had saved 6 lives. And that Captain Reed had been quietly reassigned, his poor intelligence assessment having nearly resulted in catastrophic losses. But Elena wouldn't wake up. Not for 3 days. Not until the story of what happened in that valley had spread through the entire base, transforming her from an overreaching analyst into a legend. The legend of the woman who died proving she was right, except she hadn't died at all. She'd just been getting started. Elena's eyes opened to harsh fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of the base hospital. Pain radiated from her side, sharp and insistent, but manageable. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Easy there, Novak." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Chen, who materialized beside the bed. "You took a round through your lower left side. Missed anything vital, but you lost a lot of blood. You've been out for 3 days. 3 days." Elena's mind struggled to process. The recon team? Safe. Mission was scrubbed based on your intelligence. You were right about everything: the ambush positions, the enemy strength, all of it. Chen's expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're being called a hero. Also reckless, insubordinate, and slightly insane, but mostly a hero." Elena managed a weak smile. "I'll take it." Over the following days, as Elena recovered, the full scope of what had happened became clear. The intelligence that had nearly sent Phantom 7 into the ambush had been deliberately planted by a sophisticated disinformation network. Captain Reed, it turned out, had been relying too heavily on a source that was feeding him exactly what the enemy wanted him to hear. The official investigation was quiet but thorough. Reed wasn't accused of treason or collaboration, just of poor judgment and overconfidence in his established procedures. He was reassigned to a desk job in Germany, far from operational intelligence. The message was clear: the military valued results over pride, and Elena had delivered results. Colonel Harrison visited her on the 4th day. He pulled up a chair beside her bed and regarded her with an expression that was hard to read. "You disobeyed orders again, Novak." "Yes, sir." "Went into a hostile zone alone, with minimal support and inadequate backup planning." "Yes, sir." "Could have been killed." "Hell, you were almost killed." "Yes, sir." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Why do you keep doing this? Putting yourself at risk, going against established procedures, making my life exponentially more difficult?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "Because sometimes, sir, being right is more important than being obedient. Because I'd rather risk my own life than watch other soldiers die when I could have prevented it. And because someone has to be willing to challenge the system when the system is wrong. That's a dangerous philosophy, Analyst Novak. It's the only philosophy I know how to live by, sir." Harrison studied her for another long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "Your discharge papers are in here. After this incident, there are plenty of people in command who think you're too much of a liability. Too independent, too willing to break rules, too convinced that you know better than your superiors." Elena's heart sank. After everything, after being right twice, after saving lives, they were still going to discharge her for not fitting into their prescribed boxes. Harrison opened the folder and pulled out a document. But it wasn't discharge papers. It was a set of orders, stamped and official. "You're being transferred again. This time to a Special Operations Intelligence Unit, codenamed Phantom Division. It's a small team that handles unconventional intelligence operations in high-risk environments. They need people who can think independently, who trust their instincts, and who aren't afraid to operate outside normal parameters. Elena stared at the orders, unable to believe what she was reading. Sir, The position comes with a promotion to sergeant and specialized training that will take 6 months. You'll be working directly with field operators, sometimes in combat zones, always in situations where conventional intelligence approaches don't work. Harrison's expression finally softened into something approaching a smile. I told them you were perfect for it. Assuming you want it. Want it? Elena's voice was hoarse with emotion. Sir, it's exactly what I've been training for my entire career. I know. That's why I recommended you. Harrison stood, preparing to leave. Get well, Sergeant Novak. Your new unit expects you in 6 weeks. As he reached the door, Elena called out. Sir? Thank you. For believing in me. Harrison paused. I didn't believe in you at first, Novak. You made me believe in you. There's a difference. After he left, Elena lay back against the pillows, staring at the orders that would change her life. From overlooked translator to recognized intelligence operative. From invisible to invaluable. Her sister's letter remained unread in her personal effects. The one she'd written before going into the valley, explaining why she had to take the risks others thought were foolish. Elena decided she'd write a different letter now. 3 years later, Forward Operating Base Perseus had grown and changed, but the briefing room looked exactly the same. Elena stood outside the door, her hand resting on the handle, preparing herself for what came next. She wore her dress uniform, the sergeant's stripes on her sleeve joined by ribbons and commendations earned in operations most people would never know about. Her time with Phantom Division had transformed her from an analyst into something harder to define. An operator. A survivor. Someone who lived in the shadows between conventional military operations and the kind of work that never made official reports. 3 months ago, Phantom Division had been sent into Kandahar province to investigate a suspected militant training camp. The mission had gone wrong in ways that still haunted Elena's dreams. An ambush, a firefight, and an explosion that should have killed her. For 2 weeks, she'd been missing, presumed dead while she navigated hostile territory with injuries that would have broken most people. The official report listed Sergeant Elena Novak, call sign Phantom 7, as killed in action. Colonel Harrison had signed it himself, based on intelligence that seemed irrefutable. A memorial service had been held. Her name had been added to the wall honoring fallen soldiers. Except Elena wasn't dead. She'd survived through a combination of skill, determination, and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that had defined her entire military career. She'd made her way back to friendly territory, and now she was about to walk into a briefing room full of people who believed she was a ghost. Elena pushed open the door. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. Colonel Harrison, older now with more gray in his hair, went completely still, his face draining of color. You're dead, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. Phantom 7 died in Kandahar. I signed the report myself. Elena walked to the center of the room, her movements controlled despite the emotions churning inside her. Then you signed a lie, sir. And I have the scars to prove it. She began unbuttoning her uniform sleeve, rolling it back to reveal a network of scars that told the story of her survival. Shrapnel wounds, burn marks, the ragged evidence of field surgery performed without anesthesia or proper supplies. The explosion that was supposed to kill me? Elena's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. I was thrown clear by the initial blast. Spent 2 weeks making my way through hostile territory with a fractured leg, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. I survived because I refused to become a casualty report. The room remained frozen in shocked silence. Major Garrett, also present and bearing the insignia of a lieutenant colonel now, stepped forward. How? The intelligence was confirmed. We had multiple sources placing you at the blast site. The intelligence was planted, sir. Just like the intelligence that nearly killed the Phantom 7 recon team 3 years ago. Someone wanted you to believe I was dead. The question is why? Elena pulled out a data drive and placed it on the briefing table. I spent those 2 weeks doing more than just surviving. I gathered evidence. Communications intercepts. Documentation of a deliberate disinformation campaign designed to compromise our operations in the region. And evidence that someone inside our intelligence network has been feeding information to hostile forces for at least 2 years. Harrison finally found his voice. That's impossible. Our security protocols. Your security protocols are built on the assumption that everyone follows procedure, sir. But we already know that sometimes the people who break the rules are the ones who see the truth others miss. Elena looked around the room at the faces of people who'd believed she was dead, who'd mourned her, who'd moved on. I didn't come back from the dead to prove I'm alive. I came back to expose the people who tried to make sure I stayed dead. And I'm going to need your help to do it. The silence stretched for another heartbeat, then Harrison's expression shifted from shock to grim determination. Briefing room cleared except for senior staff. Garrett, seal the doors. Nobody leaves until we've heard everything Sergeant Novak has to say. As the room emptied and the senior officers gathered around the table, Elena felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over her. She'd spent her entire career fighting to be heard, to be taken seriously, to prove that she saw threats others missed. Now, bearing the scars of her survival and carrying evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the heart of military intelligence, she was about to prove it one final time. Let's start at the beginning, she said, connecting the data drive to the briefing room display. 3 years ago, someone tried to send a recon team into an ambush. I stopped it, and that made me a problem. In Kandahar, they tried to solve that problem permanently. They failed. She pulled up the first file, a series of communications intercepts that showed a pattern of deliberate intelligence manipulation. Here's what they don't know. I've been documenting everything. Every suspicious report. Every convenient intelligence failure. Every operation that went wrong in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes scanning the data. This goes back years. If you're right about this. I'm right, sir. I've been right about these things since the beginning. The only difference now is that I have the scars to prove how right I am. Elena looked at each officer in turn, her gaze steady and unflinching. I died in Kandahar, according to your reports. But dead women don't walk into briefing rooms with evidence of treason. Dead women don't come back to finish what they started. She smiled, cold and determined. Lucky for all of us, I was never very good at staying dead. The briefing that followed would last 7 hours and result in the largest counterintelligence investigation in the command's history. But that was just the beginning. Elena Novak had proven once again that being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. Because nobody expected a dead woman to come back fighting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.